Good afternoon, everyone. It is my pleasure to be the closing speaker of the Ad Filtering Dev Summit today. I want to start off by thanking the sponsors of this event, eyeo and AdGuard, for making it possible. I'd also like to thank our Master of Ceremonies, Caro, and the events team. You've done a fantastic job. The event's gone off without a hitch. You guys have been fantastic. So please, a round of applause for them. And I also want to commend all of the speakers. It's been so informative and such a great treat the last couple of days. Just really high quality, and thank you all for the work you're doing, for sharing it with us. So to begin, as Carol mentioned, I'm the president of the Acceptable Ads Committee. It's a nonprofit organization that maintains the standard that defines what's an acceptable ad for the ad filtering industry. And our primary concern when we determine what an acceptable ad is the user's internet experience. But we also have a secondary goal, and that's to provide publishers and content creators with meaningful monetization opportunities. And while those goals may seem like they're at odds sometimes, and they are in fact, balancing them is absolutely necessary for us to be able to sustain an innovative and open internet. So I'm going to talk about balancing those two goals and how doing so relates to some of the themes that we've talked about over the last couple of days. But I'm going to start off with a story. And this is a story about one of my first interactions with my mother-in-law. And so my mother-in-law, she's a big golf fan. And she loves all golf, but she especially loves Tiger Woods. And whenever she misses his matches, she'll go online and she'll watch the highlights on ESPN.com or in CanadaSportsNet.com. And so this is, one of the first times I'd met her, and she knew I worked in ad tech, but she didn't really know what that meant. So I figured I was going to take the opportunity to kind of, explain to her what I did for a living. So while she was watching these highlights, I told her that, my company, we build software, and what we do is we allow advertisers to place the ads that you see when you're watching the highlights. So in between those highlights, those ads that you see, it's my company that places those. And her response was, "I hate ads." So, it's the saying is, if you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. Well, I didn't do that. She told me that not only were the ads annoying, but she kept seeing the same ones, wherever she went on the internet. So I thought, okay, cool, I'm going to take this opportunity to explain to her this cool technology and how it works. And I told her that, it's actually, the shoe brand or whatever it was that was following her around, they didn't sponsor the PGA Tour. She was actually being retargeted based on a website she'd visited, or an ad she'd clicked on, or some other, something else that she'd done. And it was, it was actually technology like ours was making it possible for that advertiser to follow her around the internet and show her ads on different websites. And her response to that was, "That's really creepy." So I was 0 for 2, and that was actually 15 years ago, that interaction. And to this day, when people ask my mother-in-law what I do for a living, she tells them that I'm a lawyer. So. But here's the thing. Her reaction isn't an uncommon one. And I think, in fact, I'd say it's the way that most of us actually feel when we're browsing the internet for the most part. What initially made the internet so incredibly powerful and world-changing was its permissionless open nature. And provided that you follow the technical protocols, there was no gatekeeping preventing you from innovating. But this openness and this lack of gatekeeping comes at a cost. It was also open to abuse. In the context of internet advertising, publishers and advertisers wanted, and they had access to, a valuable resource, which was user attention. And because there were no gatekeepers, they naturally had the ability to act in their own self-interest. And they did so, which was basically trying to capture as much of that user attention as they could. And the result of that, for those of us who've been on the internet for a long time, and you'll remember, was a terrible online experience. You'd visit a website and you would get pop-ups, you would get autoplay video, you'd get unnecessary slideshows filled with ads, you get all kinds of intrusive and annoying advertising. So really the system, the internet, like any system that's in danger and looking to save itself, had to correct. And this correction happened when many of us started using ad blockers. These ad blockers prevented many of the worst experience that I've described. But like most corrections, it was a bit of an overcorrection. See, ad blocking solves a real problem, but it's a very blunt tool. It doesn't differentiate between the truly terrible experiences that I described and advertising that many of us would consider acceptable. And because it's such a blunt tool, it threatened the ad-supported business model that made the open web possible. So high-quality publishers with respectful user experiences were being punished in the same way that low-quality content farms with terrible experiences were. And this is where acceptable ads comes in. And for many publishers, it was really like a life raft in the storm. Acceptable ads allows users to reclaim the browsing experience that they wanted, but it still provided a sustainable business model for the publishers that could offer a fair value exchange. As an aside, today there are over 250 million internet users who have chosen to see acceptable ads during their ad-filtered browsing sessions. But our industry is now approaching a second inflection point. And Rotem described it earlier today. It started with the rise of programmatic advertising and targeted ads. Before that, the publisher was really the proxy for how advertisers would reach their potential customers. So if an advertiser wanted to reach a potential customer interested in finance, they would purchase an insertion order from MSNBC. Or if they wanted the customer interested in golf, like my mother-in-law, they would sign an insertion order with ESPN.com, and so on. But programmatic buying really changed that. It allowed advertisers to identify users based on their demographics or based on some intent signals, and they could show ads to them regardless of the website that they were on. This had two effects. One is it commoditized the ad space itself. But the second is it elevated the data that was being used to identify the users. And data became like oil, super valuable, and advertisers couldn't get enough of it. Now, if you were in ad tech during this time about 10 years ago, like I was, it felt like an arms race. Basically, everyone was trying to outdo the other, who had the most data, who could look-alike model the best, who could cookie match the most users. There were data brokers selling real-world data so you could enrich profiles. Identity companies were matching your devices across no matter how many you were using. Ad tech companies were tracking your geolocation data on your phone. And the cherry on top of that was that all of this data was being broadcast to dozens of companies all over the world every time you visited a website. And yet no one asked the user what they thought about this. Does that sound familiar? Yeah. In the past couple years, we've started to see the market self-correct yet again. It might have been Cambridge Analytica that caused it. Maybe it was one of the numerous data breaches that happened. Maybe it was Barack Obama recommending that everybody read The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. Whatever it was, the media started paying a lot of attention to the data that was being collected, which meant that the general public started paying attention to the data that was being collected about them. And then eventually politicians started paying attention as well, which, the end result of that is we got a ton of regulation that is aimed at reining in data collection, data use, and data sharing. But the fact is regulators, like markets, they tend to overcorrect. Even when their intentions are commendable, you still get situations like GDPR here in Europe where the intention is to provide users with greater control over their data, but you have the unintended consequences of really strengthening the position of the platforms with the most user data to begin with. Udbav from Mozilla called it a regulatory moat, and I think that's a great way to describe it. So to quickly recap, the open nature of the internet has enabled the amazing innovation that we've seen over the last 25 years, but it's also created a tragedy of the commons. The first tragedy was a broken user experience. that resolved when we took back control through the use of ad blockers. The second tragedy, which is ongoing, is the unfettered use of our personal data. And this is something that has to be resolved. But how do we do that? I may be biased, but I believe the solution to this problem needs to start with the user. It's a precondition to being able to foster trust, which in turn gets the user to opt in to a value exchange that they find acceptable, and which then generates the revenue that we require to sustain the open web and to incentivize the continued innovation in the digital economy. So if we're saying we're going to start with the user, what does that actually mean as it pertains to privacy and online advertising? Well, the details certainly matter, but I think it requires at least the following. Users must know what data about them is being collected, processed, and shared. Users must consent to this. The companies that are doing the collecting must respect the user's wishes, and they must conduct their activities in a secure and accurate manner. And finally, there needs to be a mechanism to monitor the process to ensure that everyone is doing what they are supposed to be doing. For people who are following the privacy space, and for those of you here who agree that privacy is a fundamental human right, I don't think this is controversial. But this is, I think, where it gets interesting. Because I think there's a business model to be built around the acceptable use of data. People don't like creepy ads, right? My mother-in-law has made that very clear to me. But by the same token, research shows us that people prefer ads that are relevant to their interests. This is something that I call the personalization privacy paradox. And I didn't steal the 3 Ps from you, wrote on my promise. I wasn't tracking you. I came up with it all. Actually, I stole it from someone else, but that's neither here nor there. This privacy, personalization privacy paradox, and I'll give you 2 examples of what I mean that'll show you the difference. If you're planning a vacation and you're on condenasttraveler.com, you probably wouldn't find it creepy to see ads about an opportunity to vacation in the Greek islands. As a matter of fact, you may find it valuable. It may give you some more information that you weren't considering. So it's an ad that from your perspective, is of some utility. Along the same lines, after you've made your decision and you've booked your trip, you probably don't get any value from seeing that ad anymore, and you don't want to see it. This is the situation where we've often felt, I've already booked my trip, why do you keep showing me this ad weeks afterwards? The personalization in that case is valuable, and most of us would agree that it's a fair value exchange for the amount of privacy that we are trading for it. Contrast that with the infamous Target story, where Target was able to utilize data, purchase data from its customers to basically determine pretty accurately whether a woman was pregnant, and they were actually so good at it that they were able to determine it within a small window of a few weeks. So the story goes, this happened, and then Target's marketing team sent out a bunch of coupons to women that they determined were about to give birth, and one set of coupons, which was for nursing furniture and baby clothes and the like, went to a woman who was in high school. It was addressed to her, but she didn't get it. Her father got it, and then he apparently went to Target and demanded to know why they were encouraging her daughter to get pregnant when she was in high school. I'm sure you could see where this story went if you hadn't heard about it. Whether it's true, whether the story is true or not, doesn't matter. What matters is it illustrates the difference in how we perceive the value of personalization and the different values that we place on our personal data. If the value exchange is proportional, we find it to be valuable. If it's not, we find it to be creepy. So with that said, can striking the appropriate balance between proportionality and value create a competitive differentiation? To put it another way, if all other things are equal, the ad format presentation is the same, and the user experience is the same, will users choose to interact with publishers and advertisers that are respectful of their privacy wishes? And I think the experience of acceptable ads leads me to believe that they will. In 2022, most people understand the business model of the internet and that publishers need to make money serving ads in order to create the content that we want to consume. Likewise, many of us are not opposed to an acceptable ad experience that offers a fair value exchange. Along those same lines, I believe that users will come to understand that some information is necessary in order to personalize their ad experiences in a way that they find valuable, and some information is necessary to measure the effectiveness of advertising so it's valuable to advertisers and so that they in turn value the content created by publishers. And I think users will choose to permit a fair and limited use of their data in this way. The publishers, the app developers, the advertisers, the ad tech companies that realize this will have a huge advantage over those that don't. So I'm going to wrap up my talk today by stating unequivocally that I truly believe that privacy is the future of advertising. This is actually less of a profound statement than it is a reminder to everyone that participates in our industry of something that we already know. Publishers and advertisers need to empower the user experience. They must not overreach, and they must always respect the user's wishes. The presentations that we've heard over the past couple of days gives me great confidence that this will start to happen and there will be a positive turning point for our industry. Privacy-preserving initiatives like IPA, Privacy Sandbox, and Crumbs are steps in the right direction. And the caliber of people that I've met that are working on solving this problem is truly impressive, which is why I am optimistic. And when the industry evolution inevitably happens, and it will, users will in turn return that fair value exchange that allows us to continue to sustain the business model of the ad-supported open web. I thank you all for listening, and I thank you for helping build the future of the internet.